Good day. Welcome to you. My name is Tony Ballinger, and this is another episode of the Fighting Men of Rhodesia here on YouTube. I'm privileged to have as my guest today WO2 John Ashburner from the Selous Scouts. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, Tony.
I must just tell the audience that we've tried to sync John's mouth moving with his voice, but unfortunately there seems to be a lag in the broadband or the Wi-Fi or whatever. So it's probably going to turn into more of an audio presentation than a visual one. But nonetheless, we've got a very important guest to talk to today. John, as we do with all of our guests, just give us a little bit of your personal history. Where were you born and raised, and what made you end up in the Scouts?
Like a lot of us, we were from farming stock. Grew up in the Fort Rixon area, which is in Matabeleland, and all my family farmed in the Fort Rixon area. There were five uncles there, and we spent obviously as much time as we could running around the bush, chasing cattle and that with the herd boys and that when we were youngsters, and then obviously grew up with our dad saying, "You've got one bullet, go and shoot an animal." And we had to obviously make sure we shot straight and looked for the animals and that wherever they hung out. So a lot of my experience I got from growing up on the farms. Also spent a lot of time in the Wankie National Park. I had my godfather there, who was Bruce Austin, who was one of the major game rangers here. He was the head ranger. And there was a number of other younger rangers and that there that went out in the bush with. So a lot of my skills and that were being brought to fruition when I basically grew up, and my interest in the bush was there. I used to get criticized at school for spending too much time away from school, playing sport. No, that wasn't my thing. I ended up in the bush rather. And I was fortunate enough to have, as a mate of mine from school was Darryl Watt. And Darryl and I grew up together. He was a year or so ahead of me. But funnily enough, he was one of my sort of instigators of joining the army. And Darryl said to me, "You got to come to the SAS." So I had every intention of going to the SAS, but we ended up, because I lived in Gwela for a number of years, went to school there, I had to go for the interview at School of Infantry. And at School of Infantry, at a particular time, they had a recruiting team there from the RLI. So I went there just out of curiosity because my interest was still in SAS. And of course, the RLI guys said to me, "No, you can't go to SAS. You have to come to RLI first," which I understood it to be the case because they wanted basically guys with a bit of training ahead of them. So I basically said, "Okay, I'm interested." Of course, I had to go to my employer, who at that time was a panel beater in Gwela, and I was doing my apprenticeship there. So I said to him, "I'm being called up for the army," which I had been. It was a 9-month stint then. And they said, "Well, you either come to or go to Llewellyn or you go to RLI." So I said, "Well, there's no ways I'm going to go and be a territorial. I'm going to the regular army." So I went to the RLI, and they gave me my pass, chucked me on the train, and off I went to Salisbury. Ended up at KG6 where we signed on. And when I signed on, it just happened so that I think it was 2 guys, Binks and Vessels, who were under 18 had been killed in a contact. So they said, well, what's your age? So I hadn't turned 18 by then. So they said, oh, well, go home and then come back in I think April, May. Yeah, April, because that's when the next recruit course started. So I went back in April and started my recruit course, but not a full recruit course. I was classed as a jam stealer
Yeah.
to go and run around fixing targets, putting targets up, collecting ammo, taking it wherever we wanted. And the training officer at that time was Ron Redaly. And I was sort of basically his sidekick in getting all his stuff together for going out and training the recruits, which fortunately didn't last too long, but it gave me quite a good grounding in knowing what was going on and what to expect. So I then started my recruit course in May, did the recruit course, which I hated. A number of times I nearly sort of said, oh, I'm out of here. This is not for me. But I persevered and passed my recruit course and went to one commander, 2 troop. And I was lucky enough there to have a couple of my troop commander was Bruce Stelgar, who I had established that he was related to Darrell Watt. So the sergeant there was Uzi Oosthuizen, who used to stutter like anything. But when he got on the drill square, funnily enough, Uzi Oosthuizen didn't stutter. But he also looked at me and said, you need to go on tracking courses. And Bruce Stelgar also said, yeah, you've got to go tracking course. You've got this ability that you have got and you know the bush and that, off you go. So that was my sort of thing. As we started off with the basic tracking course, then an advanced intermediate tracking course, and then the advanced tracking course. I qualified.
What year was that, John?
That was the start of 70. Well, I joined our army in 68. And really from 69, we did tracking courses in the RLI then, and Don Price was involved with that. And then in 71, we went to Kariba and did our courses there at Tracking Wing. And the likes of Andre Robbie, Stretch Franklin, Darrell Watt, Henny Pretorius, Bruno Robbie, not Bruno, Andre Robbie, I think I might have mentioned Andre already. They were our instructors, and they obviously put us through our paces and that. And then when pseudo ops started, right in the beginning, obviously Stretch, Andre all went off, and I was then posted to Tracking Wing in the beginning of 73. And that's when I ended up at Kariba. Yeah.
This raises an interesting question to me, which I've asked another Selous scout I interviewed recently. Did you notice a difference between the guys who were brought up on farms and city dwellers? Did you have an advantage over them, do you think?
I think definitely yes, because, you know, we had a lot of experience growing up, especially, you know, animal behavior, all those sort of things. Also, basically, the herd boys on the farm used to point out spoor and tracks and which animals were what and that. So we got a really good background where, unfortunately, the townies, as we call them, never had that grounding.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate that I spent, like I mentioned, a lot of time in the bush and running around barefoot, just a pair of shorts on, a rifle, whether it was a 2.2 mainly. And yeah, we ran around, and then I ended up spending a lot of time at Kwekwe on a big cattle game ranch there. My uncles were there, and yeah, we hunted, and they used to send us out chasing baboons with the dogs and hunting pigs and all that. So yeah, there was a lot of experience and knowledge being absorbed by, I think, ourselves. And that
So,
gave us a good backgrounding.
such a lovely, free lifestyle, to our foreign views, like somebody living in America, it must sound something out of a book of fiction, really, the lives that many of us had on the farms. And I experienced a small amount of that when I was working in Plumtree with internal affairs, and we used to just go off with small weapons and hunt and shoot and track and on my friend's farm in Gatuma. And it was a magnificent life, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely. I think it was the best time of our lives. And a lot of people don't realize, well, when you tell them a story or something about your childhood, they just can't believe that you had these experiences, where you used to just pick up a fishing rod, your rifle, jump on your bicycle and go off and spend the whole weekend away with nothing apart from maybe a bit of mealie meal for sadza.
Yeah.
But then you used to shoot a dove or something like that and cook that. Or
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you got into...
People living in the cooler climes where we live. I think you're in Ireland, aren't you?
Sorry, say again?
Are you living in Ireland?
No, UK.
UK.
I live near Enfield.
Right. So, as I was about to say, I've told stories like this to people here in the cooler climes, and you get the Heineken stare. They look at you as if you're talking absolute rubbish. Um, but yes, what a lovely time. And you mentioned a couple of big names there, Andre Raby and Stretch Franklin and all that lot. Tell us a bit about those guys and what you learned from them, and what was it about them that made them sort of outstanding guys.
Yeah, well, Andre was SAS, so was Stretch. And also Daryl was all SAS. Any Pretorius was SAS. There was also Archie Moore, another SAS. They were all from SAS. And a lot of them, all like myself, and that grew up in the bush. So they obviously were the instructors there because of their knowledge and their interest in the bush. And we went there as students. And even though I wouldn't like to say that I knew more than them, I certainly didn't know more than them. But they taught us all the aspects of tracking. And they used to ask us about the different animals, their habits, their ways that they move through the bush, and alarm calls from the different birds, baboons shouting, monkeys shouting, that sort of thing, and the reason for it. And it was good to know that, because that's all became part of your memory bank. You put that there. And like the tracking, it was repetition the whole time. We used to have someone lay the spoor ahead of us, and then we were told to follow the spoor. And in the beginning, it was really more checking out and making sure you had the ability and the skills and that of a tracker. And then after the basic courses, you went on to the intermediate or medium course. And again, your skills were checked there, not only for bush craft, and that was also teaching you how to make fire with a rubbing stick, trying to set a record, see how quick we could make it, and making sure your choice of wood and that for making the fires was right, and the technique and different techniques of doing that, setting traps for animals, knowing what to look for, how to set your traps and where. For example, you obviously targeted a water hole with your traps, and that, so the animals walk down the paths to the watering point, and that's where you set your snares and stuff like that. And then those traps were also, we were taught to use them almost like setting up booby traps. If you wanted to set a booby trap up, you could use the same mechanism to set a booby trap up. So then there was obviously the soldiering skills like map reading. Andre and Stretch and all of them were good map readers. They basically checked our skills and that. And then there was the shooting. Obviously, they taught us how to shoot with both eyes open rather than the old method of close your left eye and use your right eye as your dominating eye if you were right-handed.
Okay.
So they brought in, sorry?
No, carry on. I was just going to say double tap, eh?
Well, that was one of the skills, but fortunately in RLI I'd been taught all that. And the shooting side and the shouldering side was great for us to be on, when we were on course, because we had those skills already. So the main thing was the two-eyed shooting, and that the reason for it and how it benefited you, and that was great. And they used to make sure you mastered that skill. Yeah, so it was really good.
And give us an overview. I mean, us Rhodesian guys might understand it readily, but we have a lot of foreign viewers. Give us an overview of how you track, what you actually look for, John, when you're moving through the bush. What are the signs you're looking for? What is it that enables you to stay on that spoor?
Right. Well, there are three basic things when it comes to tracking. You've got obviously what we call ground spoor, which is the actual footprint in the ground, in the soil, whether it's sand or mud or where, as long as it shows a footprint. That was one of your aspects that you looked for. And then there was aerial spoor, which if you have walked in the bush a bit, you see the direction the grass is being pushed or the vegetation is being pushed. That indicates the direction of flight or the direction that the person's walking in. And one person won't make such a big trail through the grass or anything, but as the numbers increase, the path gets wider, the vegetation gets more destroyed and bent over or crushed. And that you use to your ability when you're tracking through thick vegetation or grasslands or anything. You use that as called aerial spoor. Then you have sign, which is when the person moves through or over ground or through the bush, he treads on a twig or he treads on a branch or he treads on a stone, he presses it into the ground, and you've got to look for those sort of things. Sometimes the ground is really hard and you've got to concentrate like anything looking for this sign, as they call it, where you disturbed a leaf or you kicked a branch and you can see where the branch used to lie. It's now moved and it's turned upside down. It might have a bit of mud on it or something. That is an indication that someone's moved through there. And you use obviously the sun to your advantage by walking into the sun if you can, or to the side to try and get the sun to indicate or to glance off, if you want to call it that, off the spoor and into your eyes. It enhances the tracks or the spoor on the ground. And then obviously trying to tell age and that as well becomes all through learning. You can't just pick it up. Like when you walk through water, you leave a trail of water behind and it slowly evaporates. Or mud, water trickling into the spoor can indicate that that person's just walked there. The amount of water still running into the spoor, or the mud that's been taken from that muddy patch and it's rubbed against leaves or branches. You can tell if it's fresh or it's dry. Is an indication. Time of day, you have to bear that in mind. Obviously, the hotter it is, the quicker the mud dries out. All these sort of things come with repetition, training, putting those into your memory bank. Concentration, it was really sometimes quite fatiguing to concentrate on, especially when the tracking was hard. You're concentrating at such a high level. You don't hear sometimes you don't even hear what's going on around you because you're trying to track, and your concentration levels are there, just looking for those signs and listening with your ears and obviously all your sensors are there, because if you're tracking TERS or CTs, you have got to be listening and everything. And that's why we tracked with a tracking team. You had your two flankers, which went out the front of you. They moved forward of you slightly. You then had yourself as a tracker, and then you had a controller behind you, who was generally the person who controlled the whole team, and he used to position the flankers, left and right flank, move forward. When you got to a river, you deployed one flanker across at a time, left one first or right one first, depending on the terrain, and then he would once the flankers are across the river, you would then cross the river, giving you cover, making sure you weren't walking into an ambush, and he would then follow. Once you had crossed, he would then follow behind, and then you'd move on again. He also carried the radio, and we also used to use a dog whistle. I don't know if you ever came across those dog whistles. They're very high-pitched whistle. We used to use those. I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to hear one now. My ears are bugging. So, and we used to use bird call, pit made throw.
Yeah.
We used to whistle that.
Yeah, I love that.
And that used to attract the guy's attention.
Yeah.
So heard that, then used obviously sign language, making sure everyone was on the same wavelength using sign language. No talking was really, we never used to have talk very much. It was mainly done by sign language. Yeah. But the tracking side, like I say, we used to, with the concentration levels, sometimes we used to track for a while, and then you'd say to the guys, listen, I'm getting a bit tired now, or my concentration levels are lapsing, and then used to swap around, and one of the flankers would come and be the tracker, and then you would go off to take his position. And the same as the controller, he would also swap positions with you as well. And sometimes when the tracks were there, the controller would walk next to you and help identify moving through, picking up sign. Looking ahead was one of the major things. You always looked ahead, and that's where you picked up, obviously, the general direction that the person moved in. You could see the gaps in the bush where the person had moved through. You wouldn't, if you're looking down at your feet, you can't do that. You've got to look up and make sure you look at the natural terrain and the easiest path, because generally humans will use the easiest path to follow, unless they're anti-tracking. If they're anti-tracking, then they'll go for the most difficult one to throw you off, and they'll climb over rocks, move through bush that they shouldn't normally go through. They would move through. Obviously, anti-tracking slows the person down, so they don't do it for long. They do it for a short period of time. And if you've got the general direction of flight that the person's moving in, you can say, right, okay, I can see his anti-tracking now. And you get the flankers up ahead to do a bit of a cross grain backwards, and they'd pick up the spoor ahead and call you, and you then move around the obstacle. Yeah.
Can you just, a lot of people don't understand what anti-tracking is, and how do they actually use that technique? John, can you fill us in a bit?
Yeah, I'll give you the easiest example of anti-tracking is when you come to either a riverbed or a road, and if the CT or the TER is crossing a road, sometimes he take his blanket out or his shirt off, throw it down on the ground, pick it up, move it forward, and so forth, so he doesn't leave his spoor behind on the road. That is one. Then the other is walking in a riverbed, the same thing. With aerial spoor, obviously what he would do, he'd take a fork stick, and as he's walking, he would flick the grass back so it's standing up again, so you don't leave a trail behind. That's one other way. Obviously, avoid walking through mud and water, and that climb over rocks. so he doesn't leave any spoor and that. But he can't do that for too long because it slows him down as well. And you coming up behind, following him, he doesn't want to get caught. So the general trend was they don't anti-track for long. Walking backwards, trying to fool you that they're coming towards you rather than away from you, or they turn their shoes around and tie them on back to front, and things like that. And then sweeping obviously a branch with leaves on it when you come to a riverbed or a sandy road or a path or something. Drag a branch behind you with the leaves on it, so it disturbs the ground and destroys the footprints. So those are a few things on anti-tracking. Yeah.
And that left the tracking team very vulnerable. I mean, they could do a 180 degree and come out on your left flank and ambush you. Did that type of thing happen often?
No, not too often. Generally, they were moving ahead, and they just try to get ahead of you all the time. There were occasions when they did, like you say, come around, do what we used to call a dog's leg, and come around and ambush you either from the left or right flank. But generally, the flankers, which are ahead of you, that would pick something up and maybe trigger the ambush if it was there. So the biggest problem with tracking is your concentration levels on the spoor. You're not looking really for the enemy. You're looking at the spoor, and that's where the flankers came in, and they were your protection basically. Yeah.
I don't know if you've
obviously the controller.
I don't know if you've read the book Winds of Destruction by Peter Bauer. It's a really eye-opening book. He was a squadron leader or wing commander in the Air Force. And I think he was one of the first guys, if not the first guy, to actually start tracking from a helicopter or a small fixed-wing aircraft. It sounds ridiculous, but if there's a group of 20 moving through moderately high grass, maybe up to your waist or even your knees, you can start to pick up their movement very quickly, which enables groups of men to leapfrog forward and save time in catching up with the terrorists. Did you experience anything like that, or were you aware of that at the time, John?
Yeah, I agree with you. What he says is quite correct. There you're using, like I explained, aerial spoor, which is a trail through the vegetation. And from an aircraft, when you're up above the spoor, you will pick that up, definitely. And especially when the groups were large, you would be able to certainly follow them. We had occasions in Mozambique and that where there were large groups of tours moving, the helicopter pilots and that would pick up this and call us in and drop us on the spoor. And they would then, one of the biggest disadvantages of aircraft, because the aircraft is moving so fast, they tended to make the tours bombshell, and they took fright, and they would then, instead of walking one behind each other, they then would walk in extended line to try and make it more difficult for you to track. So the leapfrogging technique certainly was used. If I can just mention where we used it quite extensively was when a chap by the name of Gerald Hawksworth was abducted near Mount Darwin. And he was with, I think, Land Affairs or African Affairs. And he was abducted. There were two other land inspectors with him. And we got a report from the local when we were in Mount Darwin, and we were deployed to the road where the spoor had been picked up. And we spoke to the locals, and they said, yeah, there were these Gandangas, the terrorists there, and they had a white man with them, which we didn't know at that particular time when we were initially deployed, that Hawksworth had been abducted. But when we followed the spoor, we came to a place it was quite sandy there, and we couldn't find the Land Rover. And there was reports that there was a Land Rover which they were travelling in, and we searched around, and one of the chaps, I think, is one of the Hospital brothers, who's quite one of the many trackers in RLI, who was really good, the brothers, Hospital brothers. They said to me, there's something strange here, that ant-heap there doesn't look like an ant-heap. And I went and had a look, and I said to them, well, it's certainly not an ant-heap, and all the branches that had been pushed into it had all started to wilt. So I said to them, well, let's see what's here. And we started digging, and we uncovered the Land Rover that had been buried.
Good Lord.
Yeah, and inside, sadly, was I can't remember his Christian name, but Bland, and then there was another guy who was there as well. They had been shot and put in the back of the Land Rover and then covered up. So I don't know why they went to such trouble over it, because obviously they were just trying to delay us or something. And we then ended up on the spoor, and we ended up with information coming back that there were 3 whites with the group and 2 black African, what do you call them, field officers with them. And we couldn't find the one white man, and we couldn't find the 2 African field officers. So we looked at the spoor and that, we looked at the tracks and that, we said, right, we definitely got a group, I think, of about six tours here. And we've got a total of 3 other people with them. And it was Hawksworth and the 2 African field assistants. So off we went, and that's when we started using the technique of leapfrogging to try and catch up with them. So we then had 2 teams of trackers. One team of trackers stayed on the tracks, the other team jumped in the helicopter, moved ahead in the direction of flight, and we used that technique to try and catch up. The sad thing about it, the moment the helicopter passed or got close to the tours, they bombshelled. So then suddenly you ended up with a bit of a problem trying to locate the tracks, because there you're only tracking one guy opposed to a trail of like 6 or 8 guys, which was then easy. But they didn't do it for long, because they were fleeing now to get across the border into Mozambique. And we then got a report come back that the 2 field officers had run away. They had escaped. So they confirmed that Gerald Hawksworth was with the tours, and they were heading for Mozambique. So we leapfrogged ahead, trying to catch them, but we just didn't get them. We crossed the border into Mozambique, and then we got the report, don't go any further. The SAS guys are parachuting in front of you to try and cut them off. So I think they were all deployed by parachute into the general sort of flight direction, and tried to catch Hawksworth, the tours with Hawksworth there. But sadly, they had moved too fast ahead, and they had already crossed the Zambezi and were a long way ahead. So we never caught up with them. They apparently eventually ended up in Tanzania, where they handed over Hawksworth there. I think he was lucky enough to have a British passport, and the tours, I think, were put under pressure to hand him over, and he was then released. Yeah.
Wow, a lucky escape for him, eh? And
yes.
What happened after tracking school? How long did you actually do that for, John?
Well, I did it right from almost the beginning of my career in RLI, from 68 to 71, where we formed tracking troop in support commander in RLI. Don Price was our lieutenant there. And what we did, we gathered all the trackers into one troop, and they fell under support commando. And we were lucky enough, again, to have Ron Daly as our OC of support commander, and he gathered us all around, and we used to get then deployed with the commandos, a group of 4 trackers with each commander as and when they were required or when they went out on call-up. So I then carried on with I by then qualified as an advanced tracker, and I was then posted to Kariba at the beginning of 73 to tracking wing, which fell under School of Infantry.
And what happened there? Did you the tours were really only just coming into the country at the moment, and from 72 onwards. Did you have any interesting things happen at Kariba, or was it a nice quiet posting or not?
Well, it was the cream of postings, as many soldiers were insanely jealous of not being able to go to tracking wing at Kariba, because they said, oh, well, we had the time of our lives here. We were allowed to go spearfishing over weekends. We were allowed to go fishing down in the gorge, catch tiger down there, whatever fish were there, and we used to spearfish there. And they all said that's all we did all day, but it wasn't the case. We obviously spent our leisure time doing that. But on the tracking side, and that we obviously had our courses to run, where we had various people coming from PAR2, from the RAR, from RLI, from SAS, Police Reserve guys used to come, policemen, a few policemen used to come, not too many. Mainly the PAR2 guys, because they were mainly farmers, so a lot of them used to come on course there. And then, it was a 3-week course, quite intense. Road runs, we had to do a road run in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, you're up, run down the mount, run down Kariba, from Kariba Heights, because that's where the barracks was, run down to there, and then you had to run back. That was the torture part.
Oh my word,
and,
that's a horrible one. That's
a
horrible run. Yeah. It's about 1,000 foot up and 1,000 foot down, just about, isn't it?
Yeah. It wasn't too bad going down, but it was torture coming back. And then generally we'd go out for the day tracking. You'd go out. We had 4 short wheelbase Land Rovers that the people on course used to go with their instructor, and he used to go and drop you off, leave the Land Rover in one spot, and we used to walk off doing our tracking, come back to that, and then have a break or something. It was generally midday. It was quite torturous there in the heat. We used to sit down and have a bit of a break midday up to about 2-3 o'clock, and then carry on tracking again, because the temperatures used to get quite horrendous, say 45 degrees sometimes. It's a bit sweaty, but it was good to track. It was good to track in those hours of the day as well, because when the sun directly overhead, you also had to concentrate even more, because there were no shadows being cast on the sward or anything, and everything was quiet. The bush was quite quiet, and so we used to then jump in the Land Rovers, and the instructors used to drive back to Kariba, drop you off down by the Shell garage, which was right down at the bottom, and say, right, we'll see you at the top. And off you go, run up the mountain.
Torture.
So, and they'd be sitting there waiting for you. Yeah.
Lovely stuff. And did you find a difference between the RAR recruits and, say, the European counterparts? Because I would assume a lot of them had grown up in the bush as well. Did they have a natural tendency towards picking up tracking maybe quicker or easier than the European counterparts?
Yes, they did have obviously an advantage, especially the ones that grew up in the TTLs, in the tribal trust lands, or on farms. What we found, there was a big distinction with one RAR. Generally, those guys were they were the older soldiers, and they had not grown up in the towns. Whereas 2AR were more of the educated African, which came from the rural population and the urban population going to school in Salisbury or wherever, and that they didn't have the bush experience. So, there was a big difference. And they also had good eyesight.
Yes.
The eyesight was remarkably good. And the ones that grew up in the bush, they obviously knew the animal sounds, what animals made different noises. For having been a herd boy, they gained a huge amount of knowledge walking around looking after their father's cattle. And so they knew dangerous animals, what animals were okay, not okay, where to find water, generally from the vegetation, the lie of the land, those sort of things. They had that knowledge already. They were really good. Yeah.
I noticed working with African soldiers that they were brilliant. That their eyesight was good. That same issue there under the tree, and I could see sod all. But I think our hearing was better. Would you agree with that?
To a degree, no. I don't think there was any difference in the hearing. I think one of the things they did have, they had good sense of smell.
Yes.
They had good eyesight. I think our hearing was on a par. But the obviously advantage with their hearing being better than ours maybe is because they could recognize different sounds of the bush, whereas we didn't. We didn't have that level of knowledge, whereas they knew which bird was chirping or whatever, and that's where they had an advantage over the white soldier, which basically grew up in the towns.
Maybe the difference I noticed was I could hear a chopper or a light aircraft before they could. I don't know if that's just been too pedantic, but it was a mechanical sound which you wouldn't get from the bush. But did you do that right up until 79, you say, and then what happened after that, John?
I then left. My contract ran out. My 10-year contract ran out. That was in 78. And I was basically from 73 to 78, I was at Waffa Waffa. And I then had the bad experience of being posted to School of Infantry. And unbeknown to Uncle Ronry Daly, he was on, I think, a holiday or something. And somehow or other, Army headquarters said to me, "You're going to School of Infantry to go and train officer cadets." And I thought to myself, what am I going to do training officer cadets?
Good.
So off I went to School of Infantry, not very happy. And they didn't treat me very well there. They said, you've got to shave your beard off. You've got to get into drill order, which was, I don't know if you ever saw a guy at School of Infantry with KD trousers, shorts on, starched shirt, green shirt.
I was there. I know.
Putties.
But John, that seems so disjointed. And I mean, what unit did you actually belong to? Were you a scout, or were you tracker wing, or RLI? What were you when you were posted?
No, obviously in 73 when I went there, that was tracking wing, which fell under School of Infantry.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Towards the end of 73, because of the advent of pseudo ops with the guys from tracking wing, and I mentioned Andre Stretch, had all gone off to do their dark phase, if we want to call it, the pseudo ops. And the SAS also then wanted their staff to go back to SAS. So one of the reasons why I got posted was because Darryl left Kariba. Archie Moore left, went back to SAS. So the SAS guys left, we then end up at Kariba. Then Uncle Ron Ridaley started, obviously given the task of forming Selous Scouts. And he came to Kariba and he said to the instructors there, right, you guys are now going to become the initial training group for Selous Scouts. You're going to do the selection courses, you're going to do the tracking courses, you're going to teach these guys how to pseudo. And we then obviously got the posting from Tracking Wing was closed down, and then we officially became Selous Scouts. And that's when all the training of the unit started at the end of, basically 74, when Selous Scouts was formed. They then moved TCU, Tracker Combat Unit. All those guys were taken from Tracker Combat Unit and put into Scouts. And a lot of them had to undergo selection. They came on the first selection courses.
Right.
A lot of them. And those selection courses up at Makuti in the opposite the police station, there was a camp there that, sorry, Tony, not catching you.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's a huge time lag between yourself and myself.
I can hear you now.
Okay. Your face is frozen. There's a time lag. It's a pity all the other computers can't be turned off for a while. But anyway, let's carry on. John will just edit that out. I think let's be cognizant of the fact that there's a time delay between you and I.
Yeah.
So my next question is, how long were you at the School of Infantry, and where did you go from there?
Well, School of Infantry lasted a very short period of time because I managed to make a phone call to Andre Robbie Barracks. And lo and behold, I spoke to Ron Ridaley, and he said to me, how's Kariba? And I said to him, sir, I'm not at Kariba, I'm at School of Infantry. He said, what are you doing there? I said, well, I've been told to come here to train officer cadets. There was a deathly silence on the other side of the phone. He said to me, give me 5 minutes, I'll phone you back. Well, I think the moment he put the phone down, he phoned Army headquarters and he spoke to somebody there and gave them a right royal blast. And we'll be back at Kariba by the end of the week. So he phoned me back and he said, that's what's going to happen. You're out of there, back meant to be training people, doing selection courses. And so with that, I was now not a happy chap about re-signing my contract. So I decided to not sign on, and I ended up then at the end of 78, when I left School of Infantry, it just so happened when I got back to Kariba, I ended up with hepatitis, jaundice, which I must have picked up from the kitchen at School of Infantry or something, where some guy didn't wipe his bum and poisoned the food, and we ended up getting sick.
Yeah.
Anyway, I ended up at Kariba, sick as a dog, and the doctor put me into quarantine, and he said, you might have infectious hepatitis, you're not to associate with anybody. So he put me in a room and they wouldn't let anybody in except a nurse in an outfit, and that was it. I was there for 2 weeks in hospital, came out, and he said to me, you've got a problem that you're not going to be able to eat fat or anything. Your liver has been taken strain. So he said, you can't eat bully beef, you can't eat all the fatty foods that us army guys got rationed with. And yeah, he said, you got 3 months light duties. You're not going anywhere, but you got to eat boiled or roasted, fatless free chicken and beef or whatever. So, yeah, couldn't eat butter, couldn't eat bacon, couldn't eat sausages, couldn't eat anything like that. I could smell an egg frying about a mile away. That's how it affected my sense of smell. But anyway, I ended up then having to tell Ron Daly that I wasn't going back to Wafa Wafa, and I was booked off for 3 months. With that obviously led me to the end of my contract. So while I was off sick, and that I said, right, this is it. I managed to get a Kapenta fishing license, and I started Kapenta fishing on Lake Kariba. So that was it. But with that came having to do what if you want to call it, call-ups. So I said, there's no ways I'm going to go and become a normal soldier. And I spoke to Ron Daly, and I said to him, what about if I got attached to special branch at Kariba? At least then I could sort of keep my ties with scouts and also assist special branch there. So I used to get called on. On my fishing boat, I used to have to take my radio, my webbing, my rifle, and my kit, and I would then get called and told, right, get on your bicycle or get on the helicopter and fly down into the valley or something. The tracks had been found down there. Go and do a follow-up down in the valley. I think one of the follow-ups or deployments that I got picked up at Kariba with a horrible Northern Islander, one of the worst aircraft I've ever flown in. It was as slow as anything. And we flew from Kariba all the way to Buffalo Range, which just, I don't know how long, but it was just crazy. I then got deployed from there by helicopter to Ghana Resort. Got deployed on a follow-up there with some RAR guys. And it's funny, you're talking about RAR guys doing tracking and that. Funny, suddenly I ended up being a white tracker with a African call sign. And even they were amazed. They said, how come a white man's now tracking for us? We the Bushmen of the bush.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I did the follow-up in the Matibi, which was a real hot area for tours. And the tours, there were, I think, 10 of them had crossed the border from Mozambique and walked through the Matibi. And we followed them for a whole day. And the next day we came into a village, and the blacks there, or the Africans there, were acting very suspicious. And obviously I had the advantage of African soldiers with me who could speak the language fluently, and they knew their habits and it. And the one soldier called me and he said to me, the tours are closed. I said, how can you tell that? We've just come into the village. He said, in those tins there, those paraffin tins, there's food, and there's some branches in that being put in them to try and hide them from the soldiers. So they took the African females out around the corner. I think they gave them a bit of punishment. And they said, yeah, the tours were just down about half a K away, down in a river. So we then obviously moved out of there, went, followed the spoor down to the river, and we made contact with these group of tours there, with the RAR guys. And in the ensuing contact and that, they called in the K car, and the K car came in, and they helped us. I think there was a kill of 6. 4 of them got away. But that was quite a successful tracking thing, even though I was basically out of the army then, but it worked quite well.
I bet you blacked up your face. You don't want to be a white face in amongst 8 or 12 RAR soldiers.
Yeah, we didn't do that. I didn't blacken up, although we did wear camo cream, but hated the stuff. It was terrible.
That Matibi-2, I operated in the Matibi-2, and I'm telling you, that place had actually been liberated, in my opinion. They were brash enough and bold enough to actually have parade squares and pole and dugger huts with a flag on a pole, and they dug through sandstone 20, 25 feet to reach water. And on the one day, I counted 17 contacts, and I had one later in the day as well. And wherever you walked, it was when your hair stands up on end, and it was a horrible place. In my opinion, that place was done. It was Zimbabwe.
Yeah, they definitely did liberate that area. It was a hot area, really bad. Just talking about being hot. When we finished that contact, they obviously needed to uplift me and take me back to Buffalo Range. And helicopter came in, picked me up, and off we went. And suddenly he said to me, "Oh, got to drop you. Yeah, but I'll come and fetch you." Now, that was me on my own. He just dropped me in the bush. And I thought, how the hell is he going to find me? But anyway, he found me and picked me up, and off we went again, flying towards Buffalo. Next minute, I see the tech indicating to the pilot with his nose as if he can smell something. Obviously, I didn't have a headset on or anything like that. And the pilot just put this helicopter down into the clearing that he found. And the tech jumped out and opened the side panel, and there was flames coming out of this electrical circuit box or whatever it was, which is situated quite close to the fuel tank. And of course, he was rushing around trying to find a way of putting this blooming fire out. So I thought, well, there's no way to connect this. I ripped my blooming shirt off, and I smothered this electrical box with my shirt. And fortunately, it put the fire out. And then now we were grounded. But in the meantime, the pilot had obviously sent out a mayday, and they deployed a trog, which came overhead and picked us up and said, right, we've got another helicopter coming in now to bring in spare parts or whatever it is for it, which didn't happen. All that the helicopter did was land. The tech and the pilot jumped in that helicopter, pushed off to Buffalo Range, left me behind. And I thought, and now? Oh, you got to guard the helicopter, they said. I said to them, you've got to be joking. And they said, yeah, no, that's right. You're going to look after our helicopter for us overnight. Well, I didn't. I went and found a safe spot in the bush because it was bright moonlight. You can imagine a helicopter sitting in a clearing, glowing like a beacon. Anyway, survived the night, and I got picked up the next morning, and they brought in the spare part, fixed it to the helicopter, and off we went back to Buffalo Range. It was quite a laughable experience.
Good Lord, yeah. So did you have any other operational experiences before the war came to an end?
Well, most of my sort of thing we had a couple of ops tracking tours and that up at Boomy Hills. There were a few incidents up in Boomy. Then down in the valley, there wasn't much terrorist activity down in the Zambezi Valley. Every now and then they would come across the river, walk around, and that. I think they shot up the national parks camps a couple of times. Got deployed down onto one near Sea Camp, I think it was, where they shot up the camp. Fortunately, there were no people in it. They just shot it up, went back to Zambia. Little did we know they had laid a landmine in a puddle of water quite close to the camp, which was situated on the bank of the Zambezi. The national parks guys then came down from Marangora, went down with a vehicle, and we had by then left, and they approached this rest camp, and Richard Aylward was standing on the back with like a running board, and that detonated the landmine, and he lost his leg.
Yeah.
We then obviously got redeployed again back there, but we confirmed that it was from the same group that had gone back to Zambia. Yeah, sadly, Richard lost his leg. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they used to cross over on the boats, and we had our own little navy out looking for them, which was very interesting. Interviewed a couple of guys involved in that, but I don't think they often came across the broad body of water. It was just too easy to be detected. But sort of at the western end, they did come over, Millabisi way and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of my main tracking to contact experiences was when I was in RLI. And fortunately, I ended up in the guys getting deployed to Mozambique when the Portuguese were still in power there. And we were deployed there to go and assist them, which was a huge learning experience for us, because the Portuguese soldiers never did follow-ups, and they wore bright red scarves around their necks. They wore white scarves. They generally didn't want to get involved in a punch-up. Now, the TERS were obviously thinking, oh, here come the Portuguese soldiers. Meanwhile, it was us, roadies, and RLI. And we then made contact with these TERS, and they didn't know what hit them, because they were just sitting around thinking, oh, yeah, these are Portuguese troops now. They're not going to come and fight us or attack us. So we had a bit of a field day there. Yeah, we had some good contacts there. And yeah, that was a good learning experience. The Paracatish, the Portuguese Paracatish, were a lot more aggressive than I think their territorial soldiers. They wanted to get involved in the punch-up. So we had some good follow-ups in that with the Portuguese paratroopers as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in fairness to the Portuguese soldiers, most of them were national servicemen or territorial. They'd been posted from Portugal, Lisbon, and areas like that where there were long-haired lady lovers out into the jungle, and they had no interest in fighting. But the Portuguese that did want to fight were quite good, I believe.
Yes. One thing we did like going there was because they used to give us a huge amount of beers and that to take back with us. We used to fill up the deck, and the Air Force guys saying, where are you getting all those beers from? And yeah, they were really good to us. They looked after us well.
So just talk us, before we close, I think, John, just talk us through one of those contacts in Mozambique that you found worked out really well with you tracking and making contact. Could you give us an overview of one of those?
Yeah, we were based at Chicoa, which was a Portuguese base on the banks of the Zambezi. We were picked up by helicopter and flown north of the Zambezi, which was quite a hot area because it was almost like we were talking about with the Matibi, a area where the TERS were really, well entrenched. And we did this follow-up with the guys that were with me, and mention once again, I had two Harsbrook brothers with me, and myself could have four guys in a group. So yeah, we did the follow-up and we did it. And like I say, the TERS there were totally unprepared for make contact. And when we did, they obviously got the shock of their lives. And we ended up with a good shoot out there. And we were lucky enough, none of our guys were wounded or killed or anything, but it was a really good contact. And so that lasted.
As the tracker, were you the one who spotted them, or was it one of the other guys on your flank, or how did that work, John?
I think the initial contact started with the flankers walking up and walking into the camp. That's when the initial contact took place. And then obviously we then moved up in line with them so that we weren't shooting over their heads or anything like that. You had to move forward so that you didn't shoot them in the back or anything like that. So you had to move forward. But generally, it was the flankers that initiated the contact in the beginning, and then we moved up and had a bit of a firefight in what was a camp, well concealed, and that. But it was well established, but quite well concealed in quite thick vegetation.
In that battle casino, it was interesting that the Turs had a monkey, a baboon chained to a tree trunk there, and he could hear the aircraft for miles long before they could, and he would start barking. Did you ever have any experiences of animals that the Turs used to forewarn them of you coming, or anything that's animal related that happened to you in your time in the military there?
Not really. The Monte Cassino one where they showed the actual little Bobijan sitting there in the trenches.
Yeah.
And the guy saying, he was wide awake. When we were in RLI, just funnily enough, we used to, on border control, when we were doing border control days, we often used to go and catch a little monkey or baboon and make him our pet and that. And he also had this thing. He obviously exceptionally good hearing in that, and he would pick up when a vehicle was approaching, when an aircraft was coming. He used to warn us. So, it wasn't only the Turs that used them. We used them on the odd occasion when we captured a little Bobijan and had him in our troop. Yeah. I've got a picture somewhere. I need to try and find it where I've got him. If I can, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
But I think when the Turs were moving through the tribal trust lands and things like that, we had to be very careful in that, trying to get too close to the village, because the dogs would start barking. Because straight away they'd pick up your scent. So you had to make sure that you were downwind when you approached the village to try and do a sneak on a village. You had to really be conscious of the fact that they had dogs, and the dogs didn't like you. They'd bark like anything. And we even used to smear cow dung and that on ourselves, and that, to try and hide our smell, and that too. So you can imagine the after effects, 6 weeks in the bush without a bath.
Yeah. I remember doing a debriefing once, standing in front of a map with my major, and he had his hand over his nose like this. He couldn't bear the smell of us, But you don't smell it because you're the one who's stinking, The fox doesn't smell his own hole. Yeah, it was so funny. No, that's really interesting. I don't know if I caught your synopsis properly, really. Did you eventually go into the selection side of the Selous Scouts? Were you involved in that?
Yeah, right from the beginning, because we were tasked, all the instructors of tracking wing were tasked to do selection. And we used to do, obviously, the initial selection phase, where we were involved with the guys coming from Salisbury Bright Lights down to Kariba. Initial selection was done at the barracks up in Salisbury. And they were told, listen, this is where you're going. Don't take too much kit, but some guys did. They thought they'd take a suitcase or barrack box or whatever it is. As soon as they hit the Chirara turnoff, they had to debus, and what you had with you, you carried. So we ended up with a lot of surplus kit being thrown back on the vehicles, where the guys took off down the road, soon gave up the heavy stuff that they had. Some guys obviously just gave up right then and there and said, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to have this type of treatment or whatever it is. So anyway, off the guys would go. And yeah, we were involved in the whole selection process right from the start. So we did the initial selection, we did the tracking phase, we did the soldiering phase, and we did the dark phase, as we called it. In the dark phase, we used to get the black operators or our African operators to come down and join us because they were the operators. They knew the tactics of the TERS. They had been in the field and they knew exactly. So they were the ones that did the dark phase, and they would go through all the different phases of operating as a pseudo operator. So being, you see, in the beginning with pseudo ops, when Andre Stretch and that were there, or when I'm talking about they try to hide themselves with black is beautiful, mask themselves up with black polish and you name it, ash or anything. But you can't hide the the European features. He doesn't have the same nose. He doesn't have the same hair. So you had to wear a hat all the time. You had to, really, and of course your mannerisms and everything were never anything like an African. So the whole modus operandi of the approaches to the villages and that had to change. So the black operators used to do the approaches into the villages dressed as TERS with their right weapons. They had to make sure they had an AK, they had an RPD, they had the guy who was leading the group had to have a Toggerif, all these different things because the TERS would set traps for them and say, right, to authenticate yourself, you had to know all the passwords and everything that they were using, the right ways to greet each other and that sort of thing. And no ways could the white operators get in close like that. So the white operators used to stand back well away from the village, and the black operators then used to go into the villages and act as though they were the TERS in the area. So on the dark phase that we used to call it on the selection course, we used to use the black operators. They came in and did all the introduction, the memory training, the songs that the TERS used to sing. They used to make the guys sing them until they knew them parrot fashion. The memory training had to be spot on, where you pass the message around the circle and you say, for example, the guys wore red shirts, black longs or denims or something like that. And by the time it got round to the last guy, he now was wearing a blue shirt and white trousers. So that's how distorted the message was. So it was drummed into the person to remember exactly the same message that originally started, got to the last guy, and it was exactly the same. So that was quite a prerequisite. We used to sit around the fire there, passing this message around and around, getting it right. It was right dress, right behavior. All that had to come from the black operators, not the white operators. The white operators used to do the control, the radio, the feeding back the message, the int back to Jock HQ and our forts where the SB guys were and that, and any captures or anything like that used to go straight back. And there was a big purge on, I'd just like to mention that, obviously when the RLI guys or whoever went in to contact, they would pick up the AKs and they pick up the Toggerifs and whatever, and the uniforms and all that, and try and keep them as trophies. That became a no-no. That all that kit and that got captured in a contact and that had to come back to scouts to authenticate the pseudo groups. So they had the right dress and the right weapons and that. So it was very important that we got all the.
I know the recent captures fed in the latest passwords and the latest this and the latest that. Did any of them give you false information that actually ended up in our guys being identified as security forces? Did any of them say, like, if the password should have been 9/11/12, they made it 9/11/13 or something? Did they ever do that? Did you ever have any experiences like that?
Well, I think there were incidents, where guys got compromised, if you want to call it. there, and they just had to. You possibly ended up in a. They did end up in a punch up, but the guys were really on their guard. If they saw something was going to go down, they would react straight away and not there. But the locals in that they had their informers and that their network in that politicised them, and generally it was the headman of the village was the guy that you had to watch out for, because he was the guy who would check you out and that first before calling in the tours and saying, we've got another group here that wants to meet you. And you had to really be careful. Yeah. One of the biggest problems we had was the little majibas, the little herd boys going around herding the cattle and the goats, because we would be sitting, or our call signs would be sitting on a hill or a high feature, and 9 times out of 10 you'd see these little majibas, little herd boys, herd the cattle up onto the kopje or onto the high ground, and they were checking for you. They were checking for the pseudo teams. They had to really be careful. If you saw them approaching, you'd have to scamper and get out of their way.
Jeez. And would you say that those African operatives, the pseudo guys that went face to face to tours, were probably the bravest men in the Rhodesian army?
Definitely, without a doubt. If you put yourself in a situation like that, and I took my hat off to Andre Stretch and that, who went in there right in the beginning and tried to look like a tour or local. And then, of course, we changed the operation, and then the black operators only did the approaches. You've got to take your hat off to them, and because they were under extreme scrutiny, and they had to be on the ball. They really had to know their thing, the ways and means and that of it. That's why it was so important for the special branch guys to debrief the captured tours and get all the information out of them of the current situation and what the authentication process was. They had to really have all that intelligence to hand. And that's why when they ended up turning the tours, a lot of the groups ended up with what we call a tame tour in the group, which then authenticated the group as well, because he could do the approach into the village, and the headman that they would say, okay, I know you, or I've heard of you, or you've got the right passwords and things like that. Yeah, so those tame tours were a really remarkable asset, and they were brave as well. You got to think about, they've now turned sides, and they had to be there. Obviously, there was always doubt in one's mind. One always, I think everybody used to sleep with one eye open a lot of the time, especially when we had the tours with us in the groups, that they always were looked at, and that with suspicion, making sure. And sadly, there were incidences where tame tours betrayed the call sign, and some of our guys were killed.
And in fact, it wasn't tours that killed Andre Rabi. It was friendly fire, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a really sad situation, because Andre had his group and they were deployed. This was all when we didn't have what was called frozen areas. Where only pseudo groups operated. Andre was with his group, and there was a report came out that there were tours down by a dam, or I think it was a dam, and RLI got deployed. In the meantime, they made contact with Andre, and they said, "What's your log stat?" And Andre sadly gave the wrong log stat. So the RLI guys went in there thinking these were the real McCoy. They were the the tours, and sadly, Andre was killed in the contact. Yeah.
I was at a spearfishing competition with Andre, and our team came back with about 20 fish at Kariba, and Andre came back with 3 bags, sort of on his own. He was a remarkable spearman, and I just remember him as being a copper-skinned, sort of good-looking guy. Shame, big loss there. Did you go on any pseudo ops yourself, John, or was it you were mainly on the training side?
I was mainly on the training side. Only right in the beginning when we were doing, basically doing the selection courses and that. I went on one op up near, I think it was near Mangula. They had a deployment there, but I didn't participate like the other guys. I mainly was on the tracking and the training and the selection side. I didn't get involved too much in the dark phase, although we were there, but the black operators did all that. Like I say, we started at Makuti with the training camp there, and then we moved down from Makuti to the power line camp at the Masongo River. We had crossed the power lines, we had a camp there, and it was one of the first big selection courses was there. Then we moved to the original Wafa Wafa site, had tents there to begin with, and then the person who selected that site was Pete. Went and had a look around, and he came back and he said, I found the spot for the camp. And obviously we went down and had a look at it, and we agreed with him that it was a good spot. Obviously we had to let the zookeepers know, the game department know, which they weren't very happy about us now encroaching on the royal domain of the Chirara Safari area. So the proposal was put forth and they rejected it and said, no, you can't build this camp there. It's in our game preservation area. Of course, Uncle Ron jumped up and down, and we got Alistair Boyd Sutherland, who was in up at Army headquarters with him, and he said, Alistair, you're going to have to now put forward a proposal, the pros and cons of why Scouts have to have this area. Anyway, old Alistair Boyd Sutherland managed, fortunately, to persuade the zookeepers and that to release the ground to us. So we had this huge tract of ground that stretched from Makuti to the lakeshore, basically ran parallel to the fly fence, which ran down to the lakeshore, and then the escarpment dropping down to past the airport around and onto the lakeshore. So it was a huge tract of ground that we used for training. And the selection course used to start at Makuti, and the guys would be given their bergens and packs and that full of rocks, and they had to then march off down through the bush all the way up mountains, down mountains, across rivers, because you can imagine all the rivers ran from the road that ran from Makuti to Kariba. The rivers all ran off down into the escarpment. So when you were traversing this area, it was up, down into a gorge, up the other side, down, up that mountain, down that one, and so forth. And the guys took strain, but, fortitude. The guys wanted to be in the unit. Many failures. Started off with like 100 guys, ended up with 20, 15, sometimes 8 guys passing selection. Wow. Yeah, so it was tough. Yeah. And we never ever told him that when the selection was coming to an end. They just had to go. And then all the mind game, you punish them mentally as well as physically. Yeah, the guys come there quite mafuta and that, some of the guys,
Yeah.
but fortunately they had the mental resolve and they got through. So only right at the end did you get everyone together and say, right, another 10 Ks down the road, carry on. And they get in the vehicles and go off and leave them to thunder on behind. And then you have a table laid out with some food on it and all that. And the guys would come running around the corner and end up, oh, what's going on here? You guys say, guys, it's the end. But some guys had already peeled off and said they weren't going to go any further. So, yeah, they were quite a surprise for them at the end. Yeah.
Jeez. John, unless there's anything else you'd like to share, we've gone for the amount of time that we normally do for a talk. So if you've got anything else to say, now's your opportunity. Otherwise, I think we'll bring this talk to a close.
Yeah, no, it's a privilege, obviously, sharing my knowledge with you guys and that. And, you know, I had a great time being an instructor in Scouts, and that was a real privilege.
Yeah.
We had lots of laughs, many good guys. Sadly, we lost a lot of good guys through injury and that. And that is one of the regrets I have, is that because we punished the guys so badly with sores, blistered feet, those were good guys that fell by the wayside, not through any lack of trying, just through injury. And we did lose some really good guys, but I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. I made such good friends with people like you do in the army. You have a real brotherhood, and that's what it's all about. And the old saying that we've got, Pamoe Chete, still lives today, which is great.
Yeah. John, thank you very much for coming forward to share your experiences. You're one of the few that have been willing to do that, so thank you. It's another thread in the tapestry of our history. And as I do at the end of most interviews, I want to encourage other guys to come forward and give their talk. I often see comments like, oh yeah, when I was with Jim, we saw that. Well, then why aren't you coming forward to me to get interviewed? So, you know, please, we invite you to do so. And once again, John, thank you very much indeed. And I wish you all the best for your future.
Yeah. Yeah, some stage we need to try and meet up.
That would be lovely. If you're ever in Salisbury or if I'm ever up your way, I'll certainly knock on the door.
Yeah, that's good. If you ever get to the RLI gatherings, because we have quite a few of those, and obviously we try and put a gathering together for the Scouts guys, and that, if you'd like, I'll let you know when they are and try and make a plan and come.
That'll be lovely. Thank you very much, John, and God bless to you, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, Tony. Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.